Well, welcome back, everybody. My name's Evan.
And I'm Andrew.
And we're so glad that you've joined us back on the BCC pod. This is where we take what's happening in our church and what we're learning together and bring it into unscripted conversations that dive a little bit deeper. It's also just occurring to me now that I say unscripted conversations in the script that I read at the start of each of these podcasts.
Everything past here is unscripted.
Whether you're tuning in on your drive, at the gym, or just relaxing at home, we're so glad that you're here. This week, we launched into our worship series, a 3-week series talking about worship, both not just how to worship, but why worship matters, and kind of our posture towards it. We're going to dive in today talking about kind of all the different things. Before we get into some of the stuff about this week, we did want to answer a question that came in 2 weeks ago that we missed during the spiritual warfare conversation. So I figured we'd answer that one off the top, and then we'll dive into kind of what happened this past week.
We'll try to answer it.
We'll try to answer it.
This is the unscripted part.
This question has been I feel like it has a little bit of myth and legend around it because we've been talking about it for 2 weeks now.
Sure.
So this question came in and it says, we talked about turning to face God and not the enemy, but Jesus and his disciples spoke directly to the enemy at times. And in Ephesians 1 and 2, Paul writes about us being raised into the heavenly realms with Jesus, which can be understood to mean we have authority along with Jesus. And the way he speaks about trampling over evil forces in Luke 10. Are these different understandings of the same principle, or is there a different way to understand what Jesus and Paul are saying here?
That's a really good question. I think in general, my main point would still be we turn to Christ. But what we do see Christ doing, and this is the model I think we can, if we're ever in a spiritual battle or in a space where there might be the enemy or the evil one, that Jesus does speak to Satan in Matthew 4. And what he does is he quotes scripture and then he continues on his own kind of way. I think the main idea is we don't want to be getting into discussions with the enemy. We don't want to be getting into power battles with the enemy in the sense of us trying to combat him. What we realize and recognize is that, yes, the enemy is already a defeated one. He has been trampled because of Christ's resurrection and because of Christ's power. And so that we always want to be doing anything we're doing in and out of the power and the authority of Christ. But that, yes, we can obviously combat the enemy. We can obviously come and even in Acts, we see where Paul speaks in his name and that we can, Jesus' name, to be able to combat the enemy. So I think we can do those things, but our focus still always needs to be on Christ. Mm-hmm. That sometimes it's just really easy to be distracted by the tactics of the enemy. And one of the ones I think is to focus in on him rather than focusing in on Christ. So I would say the overall arching point is always turn towards Christ. And sometimes that turning might even mean casting out or calling out the enemy in your life or in the life of another person, as we've seen sometimes in Scripture.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have nothing to add.
Okay.
As someone who has chosen not to answer that question for the past 2 weeks, I think that was a great answer.
That's a really good question, though.
It is a great question.
It's nuanced, which is what I think we appreciate. And yeah.
Cool. So this past Sunday, we were talking about worship. We launched into the new series on it. Do you want to give a little bit of a recap, kind of what your main takeaway was from this past weekend, what you really hoped would land with people?
What I really hoped would land with people is that worship really matters, that we are worshiping beings. That's a part of who we are. And then what I really hoped was to give a bit of a theology of worship for people. And that worship involves our whole bodies, it involves our whole lives, and it involves taking the next right step with Jesus. And so that's really what I hope that people would see, that worship isn't just about singing, although that's a beautiful aspect of worship. It's just bigger, better, and deeper than that.
Was there anything in this sermon specifically, especially with it being a bit of an opener where you're both trying to intro a concept and dive a little bit deeper into it, was there anything you wanted to get into but you didn't have time for?
No, not really for this week, because I did want to get more into the practical aspects. Okay, well then how are we going to worship? What does that look like in real life terms? And I wasn't able to get into that, but I'll be able to get into that this week. So the nice thing sometimes is Sundays keep coming, so I have more opportunities to talk about things. And so, this week it'll be more on the practical aspects of what does it really mean then if we're going to worship God with our whole bodies, with our whole beings every day, living and with right action. And so we'll talk really practically this week about what that can look like.
Nice. That sounds like a new mug you need with the like Sundays always or Sundays keep coming.
Yeah, that would be a good mug to have up there. Yeah, Sundays keep coming.
Before we keep going, we wanted to let you know about some pretty cool stuff that's happening for Bethany Youth this summer. Whether you are from grades 6 to 12 or you know someone who is, you do not want to miss out on the stuff that Bethany has going on for youth this summer. So every Tuesday night, we have the ultimate summer hangouts. They're packed with games and good vibes and probably way too much sugar if I know anything about youth. We've got beach nights. There are trips to Canada's Wonderland and a bunch of other different fun stuff that you do not want to miss out on. So if you're in grades 6 through 12 or you know someone who is, make sure to check out the link in the description or go to bethanycc.ca/youth to find out all of the different things that are happening, to get yourself signed up and to invite a friend to come with you. Like I said, the link will be in the description. Make sure to check it out. All right. So we got some questions today.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay for questions.
So the first one is: worship an instinct we're born with or a discipline we must develop?
I would say that it's both. I think it is an actual aspect of our beings, that we are longing, desiring beings. To kind of put it differently, that our longings lead us in different spaces. And so I would say that it's not only an instinct, it's actually kind of core to who we are. James K.A. Smith has a great book on you are what you love. Like we are loving beings, which is another way of saying like worshiping beings or desiring beings. So I think it's not only an instinct, it's just a real part of who we are. But then I also think it's something that you can grow and develop. And you can grow and develop, I would say, it in healthy ways and also in unhealthy ways. That you can have longings for things that aren't healthy, that aren't good, that actually lead you kind of astray. We talked about if you have a longing for money, you'll end up being a greedy person, that'll be kind of who you are. But if you end up having a longing for God, you'll end up being a holy or a Christ-like person. And so I think it's both an instinct or something even more of an essence that we have a part of us, and also then something that can be grown, changed, formed, or disciplined into.
Yeah, I think we have used this term a lot. I think, or used this concept a lot on the pod. But this idea of these things being like muscles that we have to tone or muscles that we flex. That it's something that we're both born with and something that can be toned or grown or built or disciplined as well. And that. In the same way, they can be neglected as well, and that can be that can lead to bad things as well. It kind of leads into our second question, just about that kind of core or that innateness. It says, if everyone worships something, does that mean worship is more about identity than belief?
Oh, I think it is more about identity for sure, and I really think that. When we're talking about worship, then the way you know what you're worshiping is not to look at your beliefs, it's to look at your actions. We talk about this a lot on Sundays, but we often kind of, especially in the West, we get obsessed with doctrine, dogma, thinking. We think we're rational beings when really, as I said, even on Sunday, we're more worshiping, desiring, longing beings. And the way you discover that is to look at what are your actions? What do your actions show you really long for? What do your actions show that you're actually chasing after? What do your actions kind of reveal about who you are? And so I think our actions reveal our identity, and that worship is really tied to our identity as part of kind of who we are and how we are created and made up.
Yeah. I don't want to steal too much of this conversation from Laura, who's going to be on the pod at the end of this series. But just as we're talking about identity and belief, how do you think, as you talk, that kind of recontextualizes, or I think speaks to some of the worship war conversation, or the concept of if nobody's heard that phrase before, this idea of there was a wave of people who didn't like kind of new genres of music being included in worship, and there was this big kind of divisive fight between contemporary and traditional music, and over time it's morphed into a consistent conversation or fight about doctrine and theology in our worship music, and what's permissible and what's not, and what's okay to sing and what's not okay, and all that sort of stuff. What do you think, do you think our approach matters more than what we sing in those spaces? And I know when you're saying worship, you're talking more globally, right?
Yeah.
Not just about music, but kind of honing in on that space specifically. Thoughts?
Yeah, I have thoughts on that. Yeah. I do think what we sing and how we sing, all that stuff matters. I think what we sing really matters because what we are singing actually is often theology, really. That's what we forget that sometimes worship in terms of songs and singing is actually a teaching moment. Like that's teaching us things about God. It's teaching us things about ourselves. It's teaching us things about the world. And so there's a teaching aspect to it. I also just think we should become, and this is, I think, again, a problem probably for modern Western Christianity, is we like what we like and we are very consumeristic. And so when it comes to singing and different song choices and all of that, I think we should be okay with wide variety because God has created us with wide variety. Like he loves diversity. Just look at creation and how he has created the world. Like I just think that sometimes we get very used to a certain style and we struggle when it's not in that style to enter into kind of the worshipful aspect of the moment. I think our hearts really matter, and that reveals sometimes our maturity. I think we should be able to worship with very diverse styles of music. I've been in spaces where, I've been able to enter into singing and worship, and it's not my favorite kind of, I don't know, if you want to put it like song or style or genre, and that's okay. I've also been able to, if you've ever traveled outside of, the West, I've been in worship services in, South America and not knowing a word that we're singing and yet still felt very worshipful in a very different kind of genre or style than me. So I think it often reveals sometimes our maturity, that really mature Christians should be able to worship in any kind of given space or place because God's just that good and all around us and for us.
Yeah, I think that's so good. As you're talking about just that worship can be those teaching moments, right? I think about how like how important art was, right? Historically, that like it wasn't just like nice pictures, right? But that was actually a way to communicate messages, right? And teach. And like similarly with our music, right? It's not just nice music, right? That it's actually a way to convey message, right? And to teach.
And even sometimes like worship moves us emotionally, even if there isn't any words to it. That also is important. Like when we were talking about on Sunday, that worship involves our affections, involves our entire bodies, our entire emotions and all of that. And that's not wrong. And that's actually a good part of it, that the creative, beautiful display of music can and should lift us even emotionally and in different ways. It's meant to impact us in full-bodied, holistic ways. And I think that's why worship, especially as singing, really does matter because it involves your entire body and it syncs you up together and it teaches you in that moment and it can evoke beauty and desire in you in a good way for the good things of God.
Yeah. Our third question says, is it possible to worship unintentionally? And if so, what are the consequences of unconscious worship?
Oh, I think absolutely it's possible to worship unintentionally. I think we get formed as worshiping beings without even noticing it sometimes. So I would say in the West, two ways that we get formed unintentionally, and there are major consequences to this, and one we've already named, is that we get formed consumeristically, that we get formed to prioritize our preferences first. And it just seems natural and normal to us. And that we are consumers or buying things, kind of people, that this is who we are and that the West forms us in this way. And I think there are massive consequences to that because God is not a consumeristic God and we shouldn't approach him in a consumeristic way. But I think that gets set as the default for us just by our culture. The other way our culture, I think, impacts us unintentionally is that we get formed as individuals first. And that we don't think about the communal aspects of things. We think about our own personal, individual preferences, wants, styles, whatever. That we are far less communal than any other culture that has existed since the beginning of culture. So I think that, yes, there are major ways that we get unintentionally formed. And this is why we need the gospel to both not only speak to us, but also to free us and to reveal to us the areas where our lives are incongruent with the way of God's kingdom. So yeah, absolutely. Unintentional. And the consequences are that we're going to be formed in misshaped ways that lead to unhealth. Like consumerism and individualism will only lead us into challenge and difficulty, and they're not going to be healthy, holy, or freeing for us.
Yeah. So we talk about how worship is an instinct, right? Or how we talked about how like it's an essence, right? Something innate. Do you think that, and I think this has been said before, but do you buy into this idea that like, worship is almost inevitable, that we're going to worship something, right? Whether consciously or unconsciously, it just depends on whether we consciously decide where that's going to go.
Yeah. I think that since it's so much a part of who we are, that we will end up worshiping whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
That was even David Foster Wallace, his kind of quote that I mentioned on Sunday, where he says, like, there are no atheism in everyday lives. Everybody worships.
Yeah.
The only choice we get is what we worship. Like, we might choose or not choose. We might not realize it, but we can unintentionally be formed to worship our intellect. We can be formed to worship money. We can be formed to worship power. We can be formed to worship like our looks or whatever else. And those things can happen unintentionally, and there's major consequences to it. He actually goes on in that quote, and I didn't quote all of it, but he actually goes on and says the only thing that's actually worth worshiping is God. And he says this from a secular perspective, because he says if we worship anything else, it'll eat us alive. That's his terms. Like, you worship your intellect, and you will end up chasing after smartness, but feeling like a fraud your entire life. If you end up worshiping, he says, like your looks, you'll actually die 1,000 deaths as your looks change, and you won't be able to keep up with that. Like, he just... I think nails it and says, yeah, so that everybody worships, and we need to choose wisely what we end up worshiping.
Yeah. Question number 4 says, how does embodied worship challenge Western notions of faith as primarily intellectual?
I think it challenges it a lot. Because, as I said, we're primarily intellectual, individualistic, and consumeristic. We're not always embodied beings. Like, we always are embodied beings, but we don't always live that out well. And so I think this idea of us being embodied beings really matters for us. Paul even says this in I think it's 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy, where he talks about that all of us are supposed to pray with our hands held high. And like, there's just this expectation that we are embodied beings in the New Testament, but that we so often forget it. I think it really, really matters for us, especially if we pay attention to Jesus, that when he came to meet us in a body. Yeah. And that he actually then made bodies like holy and true and good when he incarnated himself. So I just think we forget that so often. And instead, we stay stuck in our heads with just thinking and rationality. And that matters, but we're just more than rational beings. Even as I said on Sunday, we're not just like brains on a stick. Yeah. That we actually are longing, desiring, worshiping, loving beings at our core. So yeah, I really do think that we've been misshapen in that. And we just think sometimes that our thoughts matter most, and we end up rearranging our mental furniture rather than engaging in things in a whole-bodied way.
Yeah, I like that, rearranging mental furniture. That's a good that's a good way to put it. Our last question for today says, can worship be considered a form of resistance in a culture that idolizes self-success or comfort? And maybe to broaden that one out, kind of what is the interplay between worship and resistance?
Oh, I love that idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I absolutely believe that. Like, worship leads to resistance, because worship, what it does in its big kind of global way, is it forms you rightly. And if we're being formed rightly as followers of Jesus, then we're going to be formed to love those who are poor, on the marginalized, on the outskirts, and that we will then act with like justice for those people. And so I think that worship actually forms us in such a way that we become not only Christ-like, but we become different than the world around us, which means then absolutely we would be working for resistance to the culture that is not Christ-like and is not holy in so many ways. So I think worship really matters because it forms you to look like Jesus. And then that part of looking like Jesus means actually standing up against the powers around us, or the powers that be, that are not Christ-like and holy and good. And I really like that idea of that. Yeah. Actually, Walter Brueggemann is a theologian, and he talks about that very much. So, and I think that's why we need to have more focus on worship. Even like reading the Psalms every day, we need to be, immersed in those things, because it helps us to become more like Christ. And then through that, to be able to stand up against the culture around us that, worship leads to resistance. And I think we just know that too. Like, songs can give hope and can be resisting kind of justice making works. So I know I was talking about worship more broadly, but I just think also singing, really matters at protests. That's what happens. People sing and they shout and they have all of that. So I think, yes, worship is resistance.
Yeah. I think too, like the idea of worship having this like realignment effect to it, right? Where I think oftentimes worship not only kind of forms and shapes us, but it also just like kind of realigns our allegiance. It also realigns kind of our perspectives in a lot of ways. So in a space of, in a culture that idolizes self-success and comfort and that sort of thing, like worship as a way to realign ourselves with Jesus and to realign ourselves with Yeah, just like the right way to live, I think, is an act of resistance in and of itself too.
I'd also maybe put and this is why I think even communal worship and coming together and singing every Sunday matters. That worship is not only a realigning, I think it can also be like a resetting back to our, if you want to put it this way, our factory defaults that we're meant to be. That it sets us back up in the right way so we can go back out into the world and to live differently and to look differently and then to work for difference in our world that desperately needs that. So I think worship is probably more important than we give it credit for, and it just really, really matters for us.
Yeah. I'm stoked to keep going for these next 2 weeks. This should be super good.
Yeah.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. We love having these conversations, but they're even better when you're a part of them. So if you've got questions, thoughts, or topics that you love to hear about, you can choose to text at 905-937-5300, or you can email me at evan@bethanyscc.ca. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the BCC pod so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the pod, do us a favor and leave a quick rating or review. It's a simple way to help others find us and be encouraged too. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you all on Sunday and back here next week. See ya.
See ya.